In 1209, a papal legate asked a crusading army commander how to tell the Catholic residents of a city apart from the heretics they had come to kill. The commander's reported answer became one of the most chilling sentences in medieval history. Kill them all. God will recognize his own. Within hours, between 7,000 and 20,000 people were dead. The city of Béziers had ceased to exist. This was not the crusade against the Muslims in Jerusalem. This was a crusade launched by the Pope against Christians, against his own flock on European soil in what is now southern France. The people being killed were not infidels or pagans. They were the Cathars, and within a century, every single one of them would be dead, their beliefs extinct, their civilization dismantled, their very name known only because their enemies bothered to record it. The Albigensian Crusade lasted 20 years. It ended an entire way of life. The sophisticated, tolerant, poetically brilliant culture of Languedoc, the region of southern France that was in many ways the most advanced in Europe. It invented the Papal Inquisition as a permanent institution specifically to finish the job. It set the precedent for using holy war against internal Christians, and it worked completely. The last Cathar was burned alive in 1321. To understand what was destroyed, you have to understand what Languedoc was. By the early 1200s, southern France had developed a culture unlike anything else in medieval Europe. The troubadours, poets who invented the Western tradition of romantic love literature, were born here. The Occitan language was rich and distinct. Cities like Toulouse, Carcassonne, and Montpellier were thriving centers of trade and learning. And crucially, this region practiced a religious tolerance almost without precedent in medieval Europe. Jews and Christians lived side by side in Languedoc. Intermarriage between faiths was not unknown. The local nobility, powerful counts and viscounts who controlled the region, protected minority religious communities rather than persecuting them. The Catholic Church was present, but it had almost no moral authority. Its bishops were seen as corrupt, wealthy, living in luxury while preaching poverty. Into this environment, in the 12th century, came the Cathars. The Cathars believed the physical world was evil, created not by the good God but by a malevolent spiritual force, sometimes identified with the God of the Old Testament. Matter was a prison. Souls were trapped in a cycle of reincarnation through physical bodies until they could achieve spiritual purity and escape. The Church of Rome, in their view, was the church of the evil God. Its wealth, its earthly power, its violence, all proof of its corruption. They organized themselves into two tiers. The Perfecti, the perfect ones, had taken a full spiritual initiation called the consolamentum, a laying on of hands that was the only sacrament the Cathars recognized. The Perfecti lived with extreme austerity, celibate, vegetarian, owning nothing, traveling in pairs, depending on the community for support. They were the Cathar clergy, deeply respected, sometimes revered as holy figures even by Catholics who disagreed with their beliefs. The Credentes, the believers, were ordinary people who supported the Perfecti, heard their preaching, venerated them, but had not taken the full initiation. Most Credentes took the consolamentum only on their deathbed, because once taken, the discipline required to maintain it was intense. This two-tier system meant Catharism could be a mass movement while keeping its most committed members to a rigorous standard. What made the Cathars genuinely dangerous to the church was not their theology alone, it was their moral credibility. The Perfecti walked barefoot, owned nothing, refused to swear oaths, refused to lie, refused to kill. When the local Catholic bishop arrived on horseback surrounded by armed retainers, wearing fine robes and eating well, and then a Cathar Perfect One arrived on foot, in plain clothes, asking for only bread and water. Ordinary people could see the difference. The church could not win a moral argument against people who actually lived what they preached. Pope Innocent III was elected in 1198 and quickly identified Catharism as a crisis. He sent preachers and legates to Languedoc to debate the Cathars publicly and press local nobles to suppress them. These efforts went nowhere. The nobles either sympathized with the Cathars or simply didn't care. The preaching missions failed. The Cathar Perfecti were better debaters and more obviously virtuous than the Catholic preachers. One Spanish monk named Domingo de Guzman, later canonized as Saint Dominic, joined these missions and concluded that the only way to fight the Cathars was to live as simply as they did. In January 1208, Innocent III's papal legate in Languedoc, a man named Pierre de Castelnau, was murdered while crossing the Rhone River. A knight in the service of Count Raymond VI of Toulouse was the likely killer. Innocent III declared Pierre de Castelnau a martyr. He excommunicated Raymond VI, and he issued a call to crusade, offering the same spiritual indulgences for fighting Cathars in southern France as for fighting Muslims in the Holy Land. The appeal was enormously successful, for reasons that had little to do with religion. The crusade indulgence required only 40 days of service. The lands of heretics and their protectors were available for seizure. Northern French barons, landless younger sons, ambitious lords looking for new territories, had every reason to respond. God's work and personal enrichment aligned perfectly. By 1209, a crusading army of perhaps 10,000 to 15,000 men had gathered, ready to march south. The army was commanded in its early stages by the papal legate Arnaud Amalric, the abbot of Citeaux. The military commander who emerged was Simon de Montfort, a Norman French baron. He was fanatically devout, militarily ruthless, and systematic in a way that the crusade would require. He became the engine of destruction. The first target was Béziers. The city had a mixed population, Catholics and Cathars living side by side. The Catholic bishop of Béziers offered to hand over the Cathar residents if they surrendered. The Cathar residents refused to leave. The Catholic residents refused to hand over their neighbors. The army besieged the city on July 21st, 1209. A skirmish outside the gates turned into an unexpected assault. The city fell within hours. What followed became the defining atrocity of the crusade. The question of how to distinguish Catholics from Cathars produced the reported answer of Arnaud Amalric: kill them all. God will recognize his own. Whether he said those exact words, a contemporary monk recorded them as plausible. The army killed everyone. Sources report 7,000 people killed in the Church of Mary Magdalene alone, where residents had taken sanctuary. The city was then burned. Arnaud Amalric wrote a letter to Rome afterward describing what had happened. The letter says that the Crusaders had put to the sword about 20,000 people, sparing neither rank, nor sex, nor age. He presented this as a triumph. Innocent III wrote back expressing some concern about the deaths of Catholics, but ultimately accepted it. The letter and the response together tell us what kind of war this was, and who authorized it. The news of Béziers spread ahead of the army. City after city submitted without resistance. Only Carcassonne tried to hold out. Carcassonne was ruled by the young Viscount Raymond Roger Trencavel, who had offered refuge to the Cathars of Béziers. His city was besieged in August 1209. Within 2 weeks, the water supply failed. Trencavel negotiated a surrender and was immediately imprisoned. He died in his cell 3 months later, possibly murdered. Simon de Montfort now took possession of the Trencavel lands and began the systematic conquest of Languedoc. He was methodical: take a castle, install a garrison, burn any Cathars found, move to the next. Towns that resisted were sacked. This was a war of extermination on both sides. The southern nobility organized resistance. Count Raymond VI of Toulouse tried to navigate between submission and self-preservation. Peter II, King of Aragon, intervened militarily in 1213 to support his Languedoc vassals. Peter II of Aragon was killed at the Battle of Muret in September 1213, one of the most consequential deaths of the medieval period. He was a crusading hero, having fought at the Great Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa against the Moors in Spain just the previous year. His death at the hands of a crusading army, in a battle he had joined to defend Christians against a crusade, was a staggering irony that contemporaries noticed. It also ended serious military resistance to de Montfort in the south. Simon de Montfort's rule over conquered Languedoc was systematic and brutal. He expelled Jewish communities. He imposed northern French laws and culture. He installed northern French nobles in the places of southern lords. The troubadour culture began to die. Its patrons killed, exiled, or impoverished. He was not just conquering territory. He was replacing a civilization. Then Toulouse rose in revolt. In 1217, Count Raymond VI returned from exile and the population opened the gates to him. Simon de Montfort besieged the city. In June 1218, a stone thrown by a trebuchet struck Simon de Montfort in the head and killed him instantly. The Song of the Cathar Wars records with evident satisfaction that the trebuchet was operated by women. Whether this detail is true or legendary, it was the end of de Montfort. De Montfort's son Amalric continued the crusade but lacked his father's ability. In 1226, King Louis Vaillant of France launched a royal crusade, bringing the full weight of the French monarchy into the south. Where de Montfort had been conquering for his own domain, the king was conquering for France. The political outcome was now inevitable. The Treaty of Paris in 1229 ended the military phase of the crusade. Count Raymond Vey of Toulouse surrendered. He had to do penance publicly, walking barefoot through the streets to the cathedral in Paris. His daughter would marry the French king's brother. When Raymond Vey died without a male heir, all his lands would revert to the French crown. Languedoc was absorbed. The political independence of the south was finished. But Catharism had not been destroyed. It had gone underground. The Perfecti were harder to find now. They moved in secret, from farmhouse to farmhouse, supported by networks of Credentes who hid them. In 1231, Pope Gregory IX formally established the Papal Inquisition, the first permanent, institutionalized apparatus for the internal policing of Christian belief, created specifically to finish what the Crusade could not. The Inquisition's procedures were carefully designed to break networks of secrecy. Inquisitors arrived in a town and gave a grace period during which people could confess voluntarily for lighter punishment. After the grace period, accusation was secret. You did not know who had denounced you or what they had said. You could not face your accuser. Torture was permitted from 1252. Confession was required. Refusing to confess was itself evidence of guilt. The Inquisition records from Languedoc survive in extraordinary detail. The Inquisitor Jacques Fournier, who later became Pope Benedict XIT, kept meticulous registers of every deposition taken in his territory between 1318 and 1325. These records are our main source for what daily Cathar life actually looked like. He was hunting the last of them. And his records, in their exhaustive detail, are the most complete portrait we have of a people being extinguished. The most dramatic event of the suppression came in 1244 at Massacre, a fortress perched on a steep peak in the Pyrenees, the last major refuge for Cathar Perfecti. In 1244, it fell after a long siege. 220 Perfecti were offered a chance to recant. All of them refused. They were led down from the mountain to the base, where a large pyre had been built. They walked into the fire. The Song of the Cathar Wars reports they walked willingly, singing. The fall of Massacre did not end the Cathars. It ended Cathar organized resistance. Scattered Perfecti still moved through the countryside. The Inquisition hunted them one by one, decade by decade, following networks of kinship and friendship that meticulous questioning had mapped. Each confession led to more names. Each name led to more interrogations. The net closed slowly but completely. The last Cathar perfect one known to history was a man named Guillaume Bellebaste. He had fled to the crown of Aragon to escape the Inquisition. He was lured back to Languedoc in 1321 by a spy posing as someone seeking the consolamentum. He was arrested, tried, and burned. With his death, the Cathar tradition as a living religious community was extinguished. What had been destroyed was not just a heresy. The Cathars had been the spiritual center of a distinct civilization. The troubadour poets had written in the Occitan language, a language of extraordinary literary richness. The Crusade and the Inquisition together ended both. The troubadour tradition died with its patrons. The Occitan language declined as French culture was imposed. The Crusade also established a template. It was the first time the full machinery of a crusade had been turned against people within Christendom. It proved that the same mechanisms that could be used to fight Muslims in Jerusalem could be used to destroy dissent at home. The precedent was not lost. In the centuries that followed, the same logic was applied to Waldensians, to Jews, to Protestant communities, to anyone the Church defined as heretical. The Inquisition that was born in Languedoc did not stay in Languedoc. It spread across Europe, into Spain, into Italy, into the Holy Roman Empire. The procedures developed to hunt Cathars became the standard toolkit of religious repression for centuries. The institution lasted, in various forms, until 1834. Its procedures shaped the very concept of what a secret police force looks like. Historians have debated whether the Albigensian Crusade meets the definition of genocide. The modern legal definition requires intent to destroy a group as such. The papal letters authorizing the Crusade, the policies of the Inquisition, and the outcome. The complete physical elimination of the Cathar community as a living entity. All fit the pattern. What is not debatable is the result. A people who numbered in the hundreds of thousands in 1200 CE were entirely gone by 1321. The extraordinary irony at the heart of this story is that almost everything we know about the Cathars comes from their persecutors. The Inquisition records are our richest sources. The Cathars themselves left almost no texts. Their enemies burned their books along with their bodies. We know the Cathars through the questions designed to condemn them, filtered through the perspective of people who were trying to eliminate them. Their inner life, their own understanding of their faith, is almost entirely lost. The phrase attributed to Arnaud Amalric at Béziers, "Kill them all, God will recognize his own," may or may not be historically accurate. It was recorded by a monk 20 years after the event, but it has survived 800 years because it captures something true about the crusade that launched it. The logic was that the salvation of the church was worth any price, that uncertainty about guilt was not a reason for restraint. Kill them all, God will sort it out. The Cathars believed the world of matter was evil and the world of spirit was good. They believed everything physical was a trap, that the God who created this world was a deceiver. 800 years after the last of them was burned, it is hard to argue that history gave them much reason to reconsider. The Pope's crusade wiped them from existence so completely that they left almost no trace in their own words. We know them only through the eyes of the people who killed them.